Hello, my name is Reese Stoica. I am a trans rights activist from Bucharest, Romania. I am not intimately aware with many, psychological theories. I don't have any, post-secondary education as of today. Planning on going to geography, but anyhow. But I would like to talk today about the relationship that I have seen between transgender identity and in general gender and sexual diversity and neurodiversity. And I've thought that perhaps case theories are a good way to introduce that topic to people who would otherwise be a bit unfamiliar with it. I myself am most versed and will mostly talk within the context of something called neuroqueering. And when I refer to queering, what I'm specifically referring to is the combination of mad studies and neurodiverse activism, which is often centered around the way psychiatry might have harmed neurodivergent people, whether that be autistic people, those with schizophrenia, etc., and gender and sexual identity, and the ways that they tend to overlap with each other. So a lot of people might not see the ways that gender and sexuality might map onto neurodiversity, but I would like to start with a bit of history because gender and sexuality have often been understood as mental illnesses when they have fallen outside the mainstream. We can think, for example, on the ways that homosexuality was pathologized, or the ways that being a transsexual person is still pathologized in a lot of the world. I myself am from Eastern Europe, and I am a trans person who has had to navigate the medical system because I've recently started testosterone. And that can show you how much it is still tied up within psychiatric systems. In my case, for example, in order to start testosterone, I had to do a psychiatric evaluation. I had to do several psychological exams, and all of those are just as mandatory if, for example, I wanted to change my legal name or my ID. There is this medicalization, this pathologizing of alternative genders and sexualities. And we can actually find that within Dabrowski's theories as well, because in his book, Psychoneurosis is Not an Illness, he actually used sexual neuroses when talking about the ways that they might lead to disintegration and to development. And I think that in general, the ways that we express our gender is just as much an integral part of our development as anything else, because it is a huge part of the ways in which we relate to other people. When I talk about myself, I talk about myself as a son, as a brother, as perhaps you might think of yourself as a husband or a wife. And all of those have an effect upon the ways in which we conceptualize ourselves and the roles that we assume in society. And that's something that I think a lot of people tend to miss when they discuss our gender, because they think, oh, the only way gender is just biological sex, or oh, gender is just the fact that you wear dresses or you wear pants on the other extreme. And the truth is that it is neither. It is a combination of roles that we assume within society, and those roles can be adaptive or they can be maladaptive. I'm guessing, although I obviously cannot know for sure, that the two of you are cisgender, and that a lot of the audience at home, so to speak, is also cisgender. But that doesn't mean that you do not express your gender. For example, uh, you might have a woman who on menopause wants to go on estrogen in the same way that trans women do. Oh, my body feels off. Everything's a little bit wrong. And that is also a form of dysphoria in the same way that a lot of trans people feel. Or it might be that some women feel the need to wear makeup in order to properly present themselves to the world, whereas others would absolutely despise it. Men also are concerned about their physique, about how that affects the way that they are perceived. They are concerned about whether they are presenting masculine enough or whether they are presenting so masculine as to put off a potential girlfriend or things like that. And that is because our gender is also part of how we navigate social systems. And when we say that, oh, there is a part of us that is integral to us, that affects the language in which people speak about us every single day, that affects our everyday interactions on the street. Obviously, it might serve as a catalyst for psychological development. And I think that it can help us grapple with social structures and the ways they can dictate, they can hold us back from genuine expression. I think, for example, of a friend of mine, I like to go bird watching, which means that I know a lot of middle-aged ladies. And I happen to have become friends with one who lives near me. Her name is Magda. She's wonderful. She's a woman in her 50s and she is unmarried and childless. And people might think that, oh, that is just a personal choice or that is just a personal flaw. A lot of people deeply believe that. And the truth is that the reason why we think that, the reason why we think it is a flaw is because of the gender system that we are in. It is because of the ways that she has expressed her gender as a woman, only for her to fall short of a lot of the kind of marks of womanhood at her age, so to speak. And to wrap all of this up, gender and sexuality have always been identified within like psychiatric systems. Gender and sexuality have always been pathologized when they have fallen outside of those systems, especially within the context of modern Western medicine and modern Western psychiatry. And these gender and sexuality systems that tell you, what is within acceptable parameters and what is pathological, they form us and they can serve as catalysts for psychological growth when we say, okay, maybe this doesn't fit, or maybe this is not how I want to express myself, regardless of what, broader society might say. Now that I've given what I think is a decent primer on, why these issues matter to me, I think I'm going to go on to talk about neuroqueering and what it is as a concept and how it might be used towards Dabrowski's theory. Before that, anything either of you have to question or add? There's three of us, so I'm fine with anyone speaking.
Yes, and if anyone wants to ask a question or whatever, just pop something in the chat and I can allow you to talk. But Reese, I thought something that might be helpful for the people watching online, I don't know if you've seen the image of the gender unicorn when we're talking about it. So did you want me to share a photo of that? Because I've got it
you can.
on my screen.
Yeah,
so
that would be wonderful. That would be wonderful.
I thought that might be a little helpful thing. So
yeah.
Oh, sorry, got my bookmarks there. But I don't know if you wanted to talk us through, but this is really the differences of when we're talking about, gender identity versus gender expression.
Right. So I'm going to explain the gender unicorn for a moment, and also I'm going to tell you why it's a bit reductionist when we talk about sex and gender. So the gender unicorn is this idea of, oh, there is sex, which is biologically, what you were born as, how your biology initially was. There is gender, which is the roles that you assume within society, and there is gender expression, which is how you kind of navigate those roles. You might be a butch woman who likes fixing trucks, or you might be more effeminate gentleman, because plenty of those exist. And then we have sexuality, which is within this context who you are physically attracted to and who you are emotionally attracted to. So basically who you would want to sleep with and who you would want to marry in the in the more romantic sense, because for some people those don't always overlap. I will say about sex and gender, it was gender originally did not arise from transgender people. We are not the ones who came up with the concept. And a big part of the ways in which we refer to it actually go back to the 60s, the 70s, when people realized that biological sex was more complicated than it first appeared. And it wasn't a clear line between female and male. For most of history, women and men were separated not by chromosomes because we didn't know those existed, and not by our social roles because those were already understood. There was this idea that men and women were spiritually different. They had just different souls. And when the church started to lose its prevalence in everyday life and science, quote unquote, science took over, people started looking for biological explanations as to why men and women are different. And they said, oh, it must be in their hormones, it must be in their blood, it must be in their biology. And in the 50s to 70s, people realized, oh, wait, all of these, there isn't a clear separation. We can talk of male and female brains, but they have a lot of traits in common. Male and female brains are almost identical, except for maybe 2 regions, and those very much vary from person to person, even those. When we talk about hormonal levels, there are plenty of women who have PCOS or have heightened testosterone. There are people who are androgen insensitive, who have XY male chromosomes, but do not respond to testosterone and so develop in a more feminine way. There are so many gray areas. And when we discover chromosomes, everything was even more complicated because a lot of people don't only have XX or XY chromosomes. There wasn't a sort of medical basis that we could draw male and female on, and sex was no longer appropriate. And so gender came into play as the idea of, oh, it's not biological, it's you being a real man, it's you being a real woman. And those are the images that started being pushed heavily in the 60s, the 70s, when there was all of this controversy about, oh, maybe male and female aren't so separate after all, because science doesn't seem to believe they're entirely separate. As far back as Charles Darwin, we had the idea of male and female not being so biologically separate. So gender arose as a way to explain those kind of social differences instead, because we are a rational society. We don't believe in the spirit. We don't believe in male and female souls. It's the social role that you are meant to play. And that is why transsexual became transgender. It wasn't really some radical kind of socialist agenda of, oh, we don't believe in sex, we're just going to invent all this new stuff. It was a much broader social movement that took place in the 60s and 70s that led us to these distinctions and what we see in the gender unicorn. Anyway, I hope that was a little bit fun.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, there are 7 participants also watching us having this conversation, and they can also chime in with their questions. I wasn't
yeah,
sure.
Yes, please.
I was checking the chat, but I don't see anything.
Okay, cool.
All right. So back to Dabrowski, and psychoneurosis is not an illness. He identified sexual neuroses as conducive to positive disintegration. When we talked about sexual neuroses at the time, that partly meant things like voyeurism, but it also referred to transvestism or homosexuality and things like that, which at the time were still wrapped up in psychiatric systems as being a disease, which is very, I especially like this song. I think it was Glad to Be Gay, which started with, "This is a medical song addressed to the CDC." I quite like that. And Dabrowski said in it, "Be greeted, psychoneurotics, for your maladjustment to that which is, and adjustment to that which ought to be." And that obviously has a very broad implication when we talk about things like schizophrenia, OCD, depression, and the ways in which they can arise from these adjustments, so to speak, to an alternative life, to a life in which, for example, a lot of people are depressed because they genuinely do not have access to community, they do not have access to shelter, and that very much explains how much social and psychological factors come together. And when we talk about neuroqueering, that is a practice that arose from MAD studies in the 90s. MAD studies is the idea of self-determination for people who are considered mentally ill. It arose out of psychiatric survivor movement, people who had been to some degree harmed or even abused within the psychiatric system because of paternalistic ideas by psychiatrists, that because you are schizophrenic, you should not go outside, you should not interact with certain people. We're going to strap you to this bed and give you pills because that is the protocol. And it's true that for a long time, we didn't know how to handle these things. And in a lot of places in the world, including where I live in Romania, we still don't. And I have had people in my family whose lives were wrecked by mental health issues that just we wouldn't be able to address in a medical context, even if we wanted to. And so there's this very deep kind of gap between people and the psychiatric system that mad studies wanted to show and to reflect that, oh, we are these mad people and we are able to make art, we are able to express ourselves, we are able to discuss the reasons why we think we are entitled to our livelihoods, to our bodies. And neuroqueering arose out of that and said, oh, there is a deep relationship between our gender and our sexuality and our neurological state. And whether it be that we are schizophrenic or autistic or what have you, that is part of how we relate to our gender or sexuality. And we want to disrupt these systems because they have harmed us. And to give you an example of how they might be related, autistic people, and this is something I've seen a lot in my activism, autistic people are 8 times as likely as the general population to be transgender. And this statistic has been consistently true since the 1990s, when you're checking for gender nonconformity instead. And it is just as true today when transgender identity is more public facing, is more accepted. And people who are gender nonconforming 30 years ago are oftentimes, obviously there are still butch women, are oftentimes transgender today. And 8 times as likely. And not just that, transgender people display a lot more autistic traits in surveys and in questionnaires than cisgender men or women, which is very interesting because a lot of those kind of questionnaires for autism were created only for men and for boys. At the time, it was seen as something that overwhelmingly affected boys, whereas today we know that male and female autistics tend to present slightly differently. And so we see that autistic people are way more likely to be trans, schizophrenic people are way more likely to be queer. And in general, there is a deep correlation between these things that we call neuroses or mental health issues and gender and sexuality that is outside the norm. And there are several ideas as to why that may be. And we need to explore those ideas in order to really grasp neuroqueering. Because neuroqueering and the idea of, oh, gender and sexuality and our mental state are related. And therefore, we can disrupt these patterns together. And we can create a world that is better both for queer people and for people who have mental health issues or who are neurodivergent. That is another term. And these ideas are that gender and sexual expression are influenced by our mental state, and that they can be used to disrupt those patterns. And when I see that gender and sexuality are influenced by our mental state, I don't mean that, oh, the genetics that predispose for depression just happen to also make you gay. That is tiny bit, what's the word, conspiratorial. Instead, what I mean is that if you are someone who falls outside of social patterns, and that is often because of neurological differences. If you are someone who is either very not attuned to kind of social situations, or you are someone who is very rebellious or seen as being antisocial, if you are even someone who is gifted and who has a more keen eye for these kind of social interactions, any of those and their expression in a myriad of neurodivergent people, because these like antisocial things, for example, express themselves in a lot of neuroses. All of these are going to affect the way that you view the social categories that are gender and sexuality. All of these, whether it be issues with understanding social situations or rebelliousness towards and apprehensiveness towards social situations, or just a keen eye for them, all of these will make you more aware of the ways in which gender especially tends to be categorized, tends to impose certain things onto you. and therefore make you more likely to express a very different kind of presentation, identity, lifestyle, what have you. And that is really the crux of the matter, because I don't think that autistic people, and especially people on the spectrum generally, I don't think that there is a gene that goes for, autism, schizophrenia, bipolar, and also transness. That's pretty ridiculous. I think that is this like social factor, especially, that guides why both people of variant, gender non-conforming, sexuality non-conforming people tend to be pushed out of communities and tend to develop neuroses. And also why people who already have them might be more keen to realize this social standing that they have because of their gender and sexuality. And those two things tend to reinforce each other. And on the other end, why I think that people who struggle with their gender, with their sexuality, tend to have more depression and anxiety and so on. It is especially because of the way that they have been treated. And the way that, for example, in my country, I'm from Romania, as I have stated before, but I'll say it again. I am from Romania, and in my country, I have been called slurs on the street. I have been followed home after school, after work. I once had a math teacher back in middle school, tell me to my face that they want to break my skull. And those are the experiences that you grow up with, that you live with. You cannot go to, say, the men's or women's salon, a hospital. They assign that based on your ID. You cannot marry or have a civil partnership or adopt with your partner of years or decades. All of these are going to affect you. All of these are going to remind you that you are not welcome in this kind of social role. And something that Dabrowski often said, and now we are going to explain why I think neuroqueering and positive disintegration can neatly map onto each other. Finally, why am I even here? The thing is that unilevel disintegration, and Emma, if you could maybe pull up one of those photos of like unilevel, multi-level, like the levels chart.
Homework. I'm on
Okay.
it. I'm on it.
Thank you. So he has said that there are the two main kind of factors that keep people at this like level one, at this level of being socially and psychologically lacking in personality, is one, instinct, and two, going strictly by social convention. These are seen as like the two main impulses that people tend to operate on in their everyday lives. And that kind of like social area is usually disrupted by being queer. That area of social rules of, you follow your instincts, you follow what's good for you, and you follow the social things that you're raised with. Both being neurodivergent, being autistic, schizophrenic, OCD, what have you, and being of a different gender or sexuality, they tend to disrupt the social area, and they tend to bring people into crisis, especially that like unilevel crisis is often drawn up by, why can't I just be normal? Why can't I just follow these set rules? Why can't I just go on with my life like everybody else? What makes me so different? And when we talk about these questions, which are often very pressing, Dabrowski has said that puberty is one of those things that tend to trigger in people these like first crises, these first kind of shots. And for a lot of people, for a lot of queer, especially whether you're gay, lesbian, bi, or trans, you tend to have a second puberty. Because during your original teenage years, you did not have access to the experiences that your peers were having. You did not have those first romances. You did not have that kind of first attempt at expression, because there was just this deep layer of shame, of guilt, of repression. And so you did not have that kind of original experience with your teenage years, and you end up having it later in life, often after leaving home. And of course, that is going to affect you. Of course, that is going to bring you to a new sort of state of crisis, and all of the possibilities that comes with for your development. Thank you very much, Emma. So, okay, that's from level 3 onwards.
Yeah, sorry, did you want the one with level 2?
Yes, please.
Let me find a better one.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. But really, from level like 3 onwards, that has way more to do with your personal kind of developmental potential than it ever does with I think, your starting position, if that makes sense. I think by that point, the ways that, gender and sexuality and neurodiversity affect you are less pronounced, because they tend to be
this
more
one
so.
do.
Yeah, thank you. They tend to be more of a trigger, and they also tend to be a way in which people authentically express themselves once they have gotten through those crises. Thank you very much, Emma.
Sorry, I'm having to screenshot them off places and then share the screenshot because they're a bit titchy.
Oh, okay.
Are we getting there? This one should be better. All right, so this definitely doesn't show that all the dynamism's out. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Doesn't have to be very complicated. So when I talk about neuroqueering and how it can affect this sort of progression within positive disintegration, I am talking about the fact that neurodiversity and gender sexuality tends to affect each other. They tend to come as a package, and they often change the ways in which people relate to their social standings, which tend to bring about crises. And one of the things that people do within those kind of crises of identity that come about in these situations is to try and disrupt the patterns that they grew up in, to go out of their way to be more, if you're a man, more effeminate, if you're a woman, more masculine, to go out of your way to not try to act normal in order to appease people. If you're autistic, that often comes with unmasking, which is masking is a behavior of high functioning autistic people, wherein they tend to kind of bottle up and be extremely focused in every interaction on how they might come across, to the point of burnout and exhaustion, in order to get by on daily interactions. And unmasking is often the learned practice of openly being autistic and being authentic in public if you're a high functioning autistic person. And that might be in the form of stimming openly in public, which is to say, self-stimulatory behavior like flapping your hands. It might be in not putting on this exaggerated voice so that people understand you. It might be in the form of not faking your facial expressions in conversation and actually getting to listen to what the other person is saying. And that kind of unmasking behavior is in a lot of ways a form of coming out. It's in a lot of ways a form of finally expressing yourself. Yes, there we go.
So it's not a. I hope I'm not
No,
on mute.
it's fine. Thank you very much.
So basically, it's not a diagram, but I guess this one comes from actually something Chris and I did. So the quickest one I could find to have the dynamisms there, but you can see these are the unilevel dynamisms here. And then you get into the multi-level dynamisms. And I guess the point was that these unilevel ones, it's because, there's no higher or lower, and you're sort of fluctuating and not quite sure in which way to act. And, the second factor sort of being susceptible to those social roles and stuff and those expectations. So it's kind of being in that place where, you're have changeable moods, you're not sure what courses of action to take, and you're pretty much susceptible to that sort of social role. Whereas I guess the point was when you get to more the multi-level ones, you start to get that higher and lower. So sorry, Reese, to hijack your session.
No, it's perfect. I appreciate it. So yeah, exactly. At first, that kind of interplay between your gender and your neurodivergence tends to express itself in not being able to follow social opinion, in it being very confusing and unwieldy, and not being able to use that in order to get out of your crisis. And Later on, within multi-level disintegration, it comes in the form of frustration with existing patterns and an attempt to disrupt them. And it is that kind of coming out, that kind of unmasking. It follows oftentimes a different expression within your gender and sexuality. And it also tends to come about with that kind of shame and guilt that has been repressed for such a long time for a lot of queer people, that has been kind of pushed to the side in order to be able to get by, in order to be able to simply manage your day-to-day interactions. Because, for example, being transgender is something that affects me in every single interaction that I have every day. Not because people are mean to me every single day, thank God, no. It's because the ways in which they talk to me, in the feminine or in the masculine, the name they use for me, ways in which they relate to me based on how they perceive the way I carry myself, has an effect on our discussions, has an effect on my standing. And of course, if you are in the closet, having those interactions every single day inauthentically, as somebody who you're not, someone who feels so separate from you. Pre-transition, I would often talk about feeling like I am a collage, like someone just stamped my face onto some glossy magazine cover, because it did not feel like it was my body. I did not feel any sort of connection to it. And once I went on testosterone, I realized just how big of an effect that has, because it does. It changes the way in which it changes the way in which you relate to your body, and that changes how comfortable you are with your eating and your exercising and your simply going out and moving. And of course, that changes you. And spending what for many people is decades in that sort of inauthentic state, in that sort of hiding, it tends to unravel in guilt and in shame just as much as it does in that kind of freeing liberation that people speak about. A lot of coming out narratives they will see in the media, that you will see in the movies, because they have suddenly become very trendy. A lot of those narratives are the very simple, oh my gosh, I've realized who I am at the tender age of 18. Will my family ever accept me? When for so many people, they are these huge kind of amalgamations of that social fear of other people rejecting you, and that freeing liberation of finally understanding like this authentic side of yourself, and that guilt and shame of having covered it up for so many years, of having not let yourself live, of having not let yourself truly embody who you are every single day around your family, your friends, your partner, your workplace, any of it. And that is oftentimes a sort of starting point for growth. I know people who transition in their mid-20s, who in their teens were extremely heavily conservative, or had extremely even homophobic, transphobic, at times even racist views that they have completely disillusioned themselves from, but that they carried as this sort of protective sphere around them as teenagers, because it makes that kind of daily interaction easier, because it manages to hide all of the guilt of not being yourself, of lying, of feeling like you are hiding who you are from everyone, because of this moralistic, oh, I am not like those people. I can't possibly be gay. I can't possibly be, in the case that I was talking about, a trans woman. I can't possibly be a trans woman because they are just men in dresses who do all these horrible things to children. They are predators. And you tell yourself that in order to separate yourself, in order to tell yourself that you are being yourself, you are being true to your friends and your family and to everyone. You are doing all of that while obeying social patterns. And that is because you cannot possibly be like them. You are being yourself because you are not like them. And when all of those walls finally fall away, that tends to spiral into these kind of very big moments, these crises, these at times to the point of completely changing your life over. When I talk about, that friend of mine who came out as a trans woman after having been a very conservative teenager, she went from philosophy to becoming a midwife. She changed her entire life around in several ways because of how much it affected her to uncover all of that and to move towards that more authentic state of being openly trans. And I think all of that exemplifies why gender and sexuality have a room at the table when we talk about somebody's authenticity, somebody's place inside of this kind of theory of psychological development. Obviously, it is not the end all be all. Many people have very, very different journeys, and most people are cisgender heterosexual. But that does not mean that they are not affected by the ways in which they present their gender sexuality. Even if most people are straight and are the gender that you were born as, doesn't mean that it does not in any way fall upon them when they do go through these big changes to also uncover the ways that they present themselves to the world within these gender systems, the ways that they tend to love other people as equals or within this role of male and female lover and beloved. I am very much aware that, Dabrowski and Freud would have disagreed on many, many, many things, and Dabrowski often points out the ways that Freud is misconstrued in his writing. However, I do think he had an interesting viewpoint on male and female that also comes into play when people are experiencing these big changes. Because you can come to ask yourself, why is it that I, as the wife, am not often comforting my husband? Why is it that I have pushed myself from what is easy, from what I've seen my whole life, pushed myself into this role of the beloved, who does not go through in comforting the lover, who does not go through in having this kind of equality. And that aspect of your role within gender sexuality, that is very much universal, and that is very much a struggle that cisgender straight people also go through, because they can come to wonder the ways in which they have formed their relationships based on their roles in these kind of gender sexuality systems. They can come to realize that they have been inauthentic as well in their expression, not because they are secretly men or secretly women or any of that, but because they have been acting as this puppet, as this kind of actor or actress that is meant to be the husband, meant to be the wife, meant to be the boyfriend or the girlfriend or the partner or any of it, instead of who they authentically are and how they actually want to live out their relationships. And that is why it is so important to talk about gender sexuality systems as well when we talk about authenticity. It is because of this kind of social pattern that has existed across societies, that has existed in very different ways across societies. There are histories of indigenous people with two-spirit in ancient kind of In ancient Hebrew society, as far as I'm aware, there were 6 genders originally, because infertile men and women were seen as being separate genders from fertile men and women, and would be given different roles. Here in the Balkans, we also have a history of women who want to obtain divorces, or who are from families with no sons, or who are from families with a history of blood vengeance, taking oaths to become men. And all of these kind of expressions affect us. All of these expressions are part of the ways in which we interact with the people around us, in which we view ourselves every single day. And so they come about in these psychological development, and they come around together oftentimes in neuroses. And so learning to disrupt these patterns, learning to go out of your way to be authentic within these differences, is for a lot of people a huge help. It is for a lot of people a huge step towards becoming this developed personality. And it's a very important tool that I think more people should be aware of. I would also, if you want a more kind of sociological breakdown of neuroqueering and the ways that gender sexuality relates to neurodivergence, I would recommend Nick Walder's. Nick Walder actually coined the term in 2008, I believe. And he has some very interesting essays on the subject. A few of them are up on the site. So yeah, I hope that this has been interesting. I hope this has made a few people, a little light up in their heads. And if anyone has any questions,
Yeah, jump in, anyone who's got a question, because if you don't, I will.
Please do.
Going. Oh, okay, it's me. So I love the fact that you brought up psychoneurosis is not an illness, because that was one of the first things that jumped out at me as well when I read it. And ironically, I'd not long been to a bisexuality awareness event at work, and they'd done a study in Australia in the workplace and found that 50% of bi and pan people also identified as neurodivergent, which was way higher than either straight people or gay and lesbian people. So, it's not an imagined sort of correlation, but one of the points that came up was to what you were saying is that the extra difficulty, even in the workplace, it's well, what's more important for me to do first? Come out as bi or come out as neurodivergent? What's the most pressing? So there's this double tension. And when we think of that in terms of the pressure of potential psychoneurosis, I think that's I think it's a very real thing for authenticity. And not to name any names, but having that extra social pressure from certain people who must not be named on Twitter, makes that all the more difficult. So thank you for talking about neuroqueering. And I was just wondering if you particularly, had any comment about the double difficulty of neurodivergence and queerness as it sort of presents, even just things like the workplace and getting along, because there's that double problem, I guess, of what do I come out as? What's the most pressing thing?
Yeah, definitely. That kind of double difficulty tends to come across in 2 ways, I think. When people know you first as queer, in which case there's an even bigger kind of social expectation for you to navigate all of these roles, for you to be able to present yourself respectably. And when you inevitably fail, and being neurodivergent as well as queer is seen as a failure in that sense of conforming to the best of your ability, that can really isolate people. And that can really make people think, oh, why is so much kind of wrong with me, I guess. And in cases where the queerness is discovered later on, and it's the neurodivergence that is more prevalent, especially with these more in kind of conditions like autism, there is this expectation upon you to be completely pure, non-sexual. Not when you are autistic, for example, there's this idea that you are pretty much not expected to have a sex life or partners or any of that. And I think both of those are big struggles when it comes to having both identities. That idea that if you are queer, you should be able to otherwise conform in order to not be a burden. And that idea of if you are neurodivergent, you shouldn't express yourself in your gender and sexuality in the first place because you're infantilized. And I think that is kind of the problem because, queerness is this thing that is so, what is the word for it? It's over-sexualized. Whereas neurodivergence is over-infantilized, I think. Obviously, that's different when we're talking about something like schizophrenia instead, or when we're talking about something like borderline personality. There are a lot of forms of neurodivergence, but I think those are two issues where people construct these kind of mental images of you in their head. And you cannot have both of those mental images of someone who is just...
Ja, hij gebruikt er wel twijfeltaal, maar...
What?
Sorry about that. I think someone unmuted themselves unintentionally.
I hope that somewhat answers your question.
Yeah, and that point about I never considered that really, the over-sexualization versus the infantilization. That's a very good dynamic to sort of call out, I think. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, also, thank you. I really love your podcast is the reason I'm actually here. I
Not
found
a
out
problem.
about your podcast.
Oh, thank you.
And just saying, if you ever want someone on, pretty please.
Duly noted. Duly noted.
Anyhow,
Does anyone,
what?
anyone, I was just going to say, does anyone else want to jump in and make a comment or have a question?
We have 5 more minutes to kill, so yeah, Kingwa.
Okay.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for that presentation. And congratulations to Emma and, gosh, I'm not sure how to pronounce, sir, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Mr. S. I'm gonna say Mr. S. Just to be on the safe side. Yeah, congratulations for this happening. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much. So I saw there was an image that looked like the human design system. Was that it? So I was very curious about that and how it fits into this. If you'd be able to speak on that.
Oh yeah, that was just the levels of personality development in Dabrowski. It was a diagram. It doesn't have anything to do with the human design system. It was simply there to show the levels that people tend to undergo in their psychological development from being these people who are just driven by instinct and social dynamics to having a variety of crises that bring them towards developed personality. It is not related to the human design system or Kabbalah or chakras or any of that. Sorry to disappoint.
No, that's all right. I'm actually now a lot more curious. I haven't seen it before. Would you be able to like maybe point me where I can find it? I'm interested to check it out some more, and I suspect I will end up sitting down and looking to draw up my own interpretation of what patterns there might be.
Yeah, so Emma, if you could drop a link of where you found the photo, maybe.
I can.
All right, then. I think we're good for one more question. After that, I'm going to say my goodbyes.
So, Reese, if I can ask a question, thank you, by the way, for your eloquence and the coherence, actually, also for sketching out this complex reality. It's provoked me into thinking how I indeed identifying as a cisgender heterosexual man, white, and some other attributes that are quite conventional in appearance, at least, can challenge myself to also explore more of my identity along the dimensions that you've shared. which hadn't occurred to me as clearly as before your presentation. So I want to thank you for that. And that also made me wonder, what do you think, because you did mention the relationship to the social world, what do you think we can learn from this on the social level, and how that would play into our social evolution?
Ooh, interesting question. Yeah, I would say that I'm guessing when you say what we can learn, you mean society at large. So people who are not queer in any way, or queer in conventional ways, let's say. I would say that the most important thing that many of us have been sort of advocating for is actually a degree of social freedom when we talk about gender and sexuality. That mostly means acknowledging the God, what is the word for it? Acknowledging the contradictions. That what I mean when I say acknowledging the contradictions is, instead of creating these kind of extremely tight social roles, we can in fact not, and creating these further labels in order to push down the people who do have various identities. We can instead take note when we meet people what those contradictions are. We can try to just emulate them in our heads. When you meet somebody who is, for example, who is otherwise a very feminine woman, but who has extremely masculine interests, or someone who is a cisgender man, but who works within a mostly female kind of work environment and a mostly female profession like nursing. Or if we're talking to a transgender person who still goes by the name that they were born as. There are all of these kind of small contradictions that we tend to brush aside. And we tend to go, oh, either this doesn't count because X, or oh, him being a nurse means that he's secretly gay, or we do something to try and push people back into their place. And I think one of the best ways that we can kind of resensitize ourselves to diversity and be able to see it both in ourselves and in others, and to kind of look at them as the whole humans that they are, is to actually go out of our way to acknowledge when they have these things that are socially contradictory. When, for example, you have somebody who's non-binary but still goes by pronouns like he or she, all of these things, instead of going, they're just confused, they're going to come today eventually, things like that. You can just go out of your way to go, oh, in the people that I know, in the people that I interact with, what are those contradictions that I push aside? Because all of us have this kind of diversity. And I think that is the best thing that we can do socially in order to come to like a more understanding place, is to stop pushing them under the rug.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that question. And I hope that this has been a nice talk for everyone who attended. Thank you very much. If you want to, you can find me by this name on LinkedIn if you wish. I also have an Instagram that's Spider Reese. That's Spider and then my name Reese with a single R. And thank you very much for everyone who attended, and I hope that you continue your learning journey within all of these different combinations of gender and sexuality and neurodivergence. And yeah, I hope to enjoy the rest of this Congress.